But can a subjection of this extent be paid to a tyrant or usurper? Can we support those we are bound to suppress? Can we love the ungodly and help those that hate the Lord? Can we consent that we and our posterity should be slaves? Can we honor them who are vile and the vilest of men, how high soever they be exalted? Thirdly, the ground of this subjection is for conscience sake, not for wrath, that is, so far and so long as one is constrained by fear and to avoid a greater evil to stoop to him, but out of conscience of duty, both that of piety to God, who ordained magistracy, and that of equity to him who is his minister for good, and under pain of damnation if we break this orderly subjection, Romans 13, verses 2 and 5. But can it be imagined that all this is due to a tyrant and usurper? Can it be out of conscience, because he is the Lord's minister for good? The contrary is clear, and he is the devil's drudge serving his interest. Is resistance to tyrants a damnable sin? I hope to prove it to be a duty. Fourthly, if subjection to tyrants and usurpers will inveigle us against their snares and involve us in their sin and judgment, then it is not to be owned to them. But the former is true, therefore the latter. In the foregoing head I drew an argument for withdrawing from and disowning the prelatic ministers from the hazard of partaking in their sin and of being obnoxious to their judgment, because people are often punished for their pastors' sins. Aaron and his sons, polluting themselves, would have brought wrath upon all the people. Leviticus 10, verse 6. Because the teachers had transgressed against the Lord, therefore was Jacob given to the curse, and Israel to reproaches. Isaiah 43, verses 27 and 28. And all these miseries lamented by the church were inflicted for the sins of her prophets and for the iniquities of her priests. Lamentations 4:13. The reason was because they owned them, followed them, countenanced them, complied with them, or connived at them, or did not hinder or else disown them. The same argument will evince the necessity of withdrawing our subjection from and disowning usurping and tyrannical rulers when we cannot hinder their wickedness nor give any other testimony against them to avert the wrath of the Lord. If the defections of ministers will bring on the whole nation desolating judgments, then much more have we reason to fear it when both magistrates and ministers are involved in jointly carrying on and caressing and encouraging each other in promoting a woeful apostasy from God, when the heads of the house of Jacob and princes of the house of Israel abhor judgment and pervert all equity. The heads judge for reward, and the priests teach for hire, and the prophets divine for money, and yet lean upon the Lord and say, Is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. Then we can expect nothing but that Zion, for their sake, shall be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high places of the forest. Micah 3, verses 9 and 11. 9, 11, and 12, excuse me. Certain it is that subjects have smarted sore for the sins of their rulers. For Saul's sin in breaking covenant with the Gibeonites, the land suffered 3 years' famine, 2 Samuel 21, verse 1. And the wrath of the Lord could not be appeased till 7 of his sons were hanged up unto the Lord. What then shall appease the wrath of God for the unparalleled breach of covenant with God in our days? For David's sin of numbering the people, 70,000 men died by the pestilence, 2 Samuel 24, verse 5. For Jeroboam's sin of idolatry, who made Israel to sin, the Lord threatens to give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam. 1 Kings 14, verse 16. Only they escaped this judgment, who withdrew themselves and fell into Judah. For Ahab's sin of letting go a man whom the Lord had appointed to utter destruction, the Lord threatens him. Thy life shall go for his life, and thy people for his people. 1 Kings 20, verse 42. Because Manasseh, king of Judah, did many abominations, therefore the Lord threatened to bring such evil upon Jerusalem and Judah, that whosoever heard it, his ears should tingle, etc. 2 Kings 21, verses 11 and 12. And notwithstanding his repentance and the reformation in the days of Josiah, notwithstanding the Lord turned not from the fierceness of his great wrath, wherewith his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations that Manasseh had provoked him withal. 2 Kings 23, verse 26, which was accomplished by the hands of the Chaldeans in Jehoiakim's time. Surely at the commandment of the Lord this came upon Judah to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood which he shed, which the Lord would not pardon. 2 Kings 24, verses 3 and 4. And Jeremiah further threatens that they should be removed into all kingdoms of the earth, because of Manasseh, for that which he did in Jerusalem, Jeremiah 15, verse 4. Certain passages were recorded for our learning, Romans 15:4, and for our examples to the intent we should not do as they did, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 6, and for our admonition, verse 11. Whence we may be admonished that it is not enough to keep ourselves free of public sins of rulers. Many of those then punished were free of all actual accession to them, but they became accessory to and involved in the guilt of them when they did not endeavor to hinder them and bring them to condign punishment for them according to the law of God, which respecteth not persons, or at least because they did not revolt from them as Libnah did. There might be other provocations on the people's part, no doubt, which the Lord did also punish by these judgments. But when the Lord specifies the sin of rulers as the particular procuring cause of the judgment, it were presumption to make it the occasion only of the Lord's punishing them. For plain it is, if these sins of rulers had not been committed, which was the ground of the threatening and execution, the judgment would have been prevented. And if the people had bestirred themselves as became them, in repressing and restraining such wickedness, they had not so smarted. And when that sin, so threatened and punished, was removed, then the judgment itself was removed or deferred. It is just and necessary that the subjects, being jointly included with their rulers in the same bond of fidelity to God, be liable to be punished for their rebellion and apostasy when they continue under the bond of subjection to them. But how deplorable were our condition if we should stand obnoxious to divine judgments for the atheism, idolatry, murders, and adulteries of our rulers, and yet be neither authorized nor capacitated to hinder it, nor permitted to withdraw ourselves from subjection to them. But it is not so, for the Lord's making us responsible for their debt is in empowering us either to repress their wickedness when he gives us capacity, or at least to save ourselves harmless from their crimes by disowning them, that being the only way of standing no longer accountable for their souls. 12thly, it remains to consider the end for which government was instituted by God and constituted by men, from whence I argue that government that destroys the ends of government is not to be owned, but tyranny, and especially this under which we howl, destroys all the ends of government, therefore it is not to be owned. The minor I prove thus, that government that destroys all religion and safety destroys all the ends of government. But this popish and arbitrary absolute power destroys religion and safety. Therefore, it is evident, both from the laws of nature and revelation, that the ends of government are the glory of God and the good of mankind. The first is the glory of God, the ultimate end of all ordinances, to which whatever is opposite is not to be owned by them that fear him. Whatever power then is destructive to religion, and is applied and employed against the glory of the universal King, and for withdrawing us from the fealty and obedience to him, is nothing but rebellion against the supreme Lord and lawgiver, and a traitorous conspiracy against the Almighty, and therefore not to be owned. And they are enemies to religion, or strangers to it, who are not sensible. This hath been the design of the present government, at least these 27 years, to overturn the reformed, covenanted religion, and to introduce popery. Hence, seeing a king at his best and highest elevation is only a mean for preserving religion, and for this end only, chosen of the people to be keeper of both tables of the law, he is not to be regarded, but wholly laid aside, when he not only moves without his sphere, but his motion infers the ruin of the ends of his erection, and when he employs all his power for the destruction of the cause of Christ and advancement of Antichrist, giving his power to the beast, he is so far from deserving the deference of the power ordained of God, that he is to be looked upon and treated as a traitor to God, and stated enemy to religion and all righteousness. The second end of government is the good of the people, which is the supreme and cardinal law. The safety of the people is the supreme law, which cannot be denied, if it be considered first. For this only the magistrate is appointed of God to be his minister for the people's good, Romans 13, verse 4. And they have no goodness, but as they conduce to this end. For all the power they have of God is with this proviso, to promote his people's prosperity. It were blasphemy to say they are his authorized ministers for their destruction, to which, if their conduct degenerate, they degrade themselves and so must be disowned. He is therefore in his institution no more than a mean for this end, and himself cannot be either the whole or half of the end, for then he should be both the end and the mean of government, and it is contrary to God's mold to have this for his end, to multiply to himself silver and gold, or to lift up himself above his brethren, Deuteronomy 17, verses 17 and 20. If therefore he hath any other end than the good of the people, he cannot be owned as one of God's molding. Secondly, this only is the highest pitch of good princes' ambition, to postpone their own safety to the people's safety. Moses desired rather than the people should be destroyed, that his name should be raised out of the book of life. And David would rather the Lord's hand be on his and his father's house than on the people, that they should be plagued. 1 Chronicles 21, verse 17. But he that would seek his own ambitious ends with the destruction of the people hath the spirit of the devil, and is to be carried towards as one possessed with that malignant spirit. Thirdly, originally their power is from the people, from whom all their dignity is derived, with reserve of their safety, which is not the donative of kings, nor held by concession from them, nor can it be resigned or surrendered to the disposal of kings, since God hath provided in his universal laws that no authority make any disposal but for the good of the people. This cannot be forfeited by the usurpation of monarchs, nor being always fixed in the essential laws of government, they may reclaim and recover it when they please. Since then we cannot alienate our safety, we cannot own that authority which is inconsistent with it. Fourthly, the attaining this end was the main ground and motive of peoples deliberating to constitute a government and to choose such a form, because they thought it most conducible for their good, and to admit such persons as fittest instruments for compassing this end, and to establish such a conveyance as they thought most contributive for this end. When therefore princes cease to be what they could be constitute for, they cease to have an authority to be owned, but ceasing to answer these ends of government, they cease to be what they could be constitute for. Fifthly, for no other end were magistrates limited with conditions, but to bound them that they might do nothing against the people's good and safety.